In 2014, a feminine care brand made a vampire show. There were no product demos, no swimming pools, none of that weird blue liquid. If you've ever seen a feminine care commercial, you know exactly what I mean. But it was like this quasi mystery series set out of college, and it happened over 3 seasons, and it got 71 million views. And the biggest stat here, 93% of the people who watched it could still remember the brand months later, despite that brand not showing their logo until like halfway through the series. So I want to talk about that today, not just because the numbers are impressive, but because of what it actually tells us about how branded content works when it's done right. The brand was You by Kotex, and the show was called Carmilla. And what they pulled off is something a lot of brands talk about, but very few actually do. Okay, so before we get into the show, let's talk about the problem that they were solving. Even in 2014, audiences, especially the younger ones, had essentially developed a biological reflex for ignoring advertising. The skip button wasn't a button anymore, it was more of a muscle, pretty conditioned, pretty automatic. And feminine care as a category makes this even harder. Like, historically, these campaigns have been pretty clinical, or like cheerful in a way that makes you slightly uncomfortable, or, and this is kind of the sweet spot, that these marketers keep hitting year over year, somehow both at once. Before we get into the show, let's talk about the problem that they were solving. In 2014, audiences, and especially younger ones, had essentially developed a biological reflex for ignoring advertising. The skip button wasn't a button anymore, it was more like a muscle, pretty conditioned and automatic. And then the feminine care industry as an entire category makes this even harder, because historically these campaigns have been pretty clinical, or like overly cheerful in a way that makes you uncomfortable. Or even, and this is the sweet spot that marketers kept hitting, somehow both at once. Because the product isn't something that people want to be marketed to about, even when they need it. So, You by Kotex, working with Canadian company Shaftesbury and their digital studio Shift 2, started asking a different question. The question was not, how do we make an ad that people will sit through? But the real question was, what if we just made something that people actually wanted to watch? That's a harder question, and honestly, most brands kind of stop there, because buying media and interrupting people is the known quality. Earning attention is not. Carmilla launched on YouTube in August of 2014, a scripted web series loosely based on a 19th century vampire novella of the same name. The premise, a first-year student named Laura has her roommate go missing. The replacement, Carmilla, is not exactly normal. I'll leave it at that. Here's the production decision that I think mattered the most. The whole show is shot from one static camera angle. It's this one. It's a webcam. Laura is vlogging and she's talking directly to you. Season 1 was shot in 4 days in a house in Toronto. Low budget, very high concept. Nobody won an Emmy, but nobody expected to. Now, most people assume branded content means that the brand is everywhere. Characters casually mentioning the product, logo burned into the bottom of every frame. You can practically hear the marketing brief in the dialogue. But Carmilla didn't actually do any of that. You by Kotex, like I said, didn't show a logo until mid-season. The product was almost never directly referenced. The brand attached itself instead to a feeling. Fun, a little bold, genuinely itself. The audience didn't feel sold to. They felt entertained. That distinction matters more than anything else in this story. Let's look at how it actually performed. When I said 71 million views, that was in 193 countries, translated into more than 20 languages. 93% brand recall among Carmilla viewers compared to around 20% for a typical TV commercial. 61% of viewers tried You by Kotex for the first time after watching the series. 82% female audience, 64% aged 18 to 24. This is exactly who they wanted to reach and needed to reach. Take a second with that recall number. A standard 30-second commercial, the kind of brand might spend, no joke, hundreds of thousands of dollars to produce and millions more to air, gets remembered by about 1 in every 5 people. Carmilla got nearly 19 out of 20 because people weren't just seeing it, they were watching it, they were living it, they were rewatching it, they were recommending it. The fan community called themselves Cream Puffs. They organized, they made fan art, they had opinions about the characters, which is awesome. Like, for a tampon brand, I can't stress this enough, that's the kind of relationship no media buy will ever get you. Now, I know some of you are marketing pros or business owners, and maybe you're thinking, hey, that's a great story, but you by Kotex had a real budget, a production company, an existing audience. I run a plumbing company. I run a brewery. I'm absolutely not making a vampire show. Well, that's fair because nobody's asking you to, but here's what I'd push back on. The reason Carmilla worked had almost nothing to do with the budget. And it wasn't even the vampires, although, to be fair, in 2014, the vampires probably helped. It worked because somebody had a really simple question. What does my audience actually want to watch? And then they had the discipline to make that instead of a forgettable ad. What happened after the campaign is what separates Carmilla from most branded entertainment. Because it didn't stop. It became a franchise. It became a feature film, a book deal, a primetime series. Awards? A Canadian Screen Award, the Rocky Award for Branded Entertainment at the Banff World Media Festival, MIP-TV's Brand Content of the Year in 2018. Shaftesbury didn't produce an ad, they built an IP, intellectual property with its own audience and its own merchandise and its own cultural footprint. And this is what I want to leave you with. You by Kotex stopped renting an audience, paying for 30 seconds of somebody else's attention, and they started building their own. An audience that came back every week, that cared, that showed up, that they talked about it. That's a fundamentally different relationship between a brand and the people that you're trying to reach. And once you see that, it's pretty hard to unsee. What's the actual lesson here for anybody watching this in 2026, by the way? Thank you for watching. Carmilla didn't work because of a massive budget. It didn't work because of its celebrity talent or a network deal. It worked because the team respected the audience enough to ask them what they actually wanted to watch without letting the brand get in the way of the story. Brass tacks. What's the actual lesson for anybody watching this in 2026? By the way, thank you for watching. Carmilla didn't work because of a massive budget, and it didn't need celebrity talent or a network deal. It worked because the team respected the audience enough to actually ask what they wanted to watch. And then they made that without letting the brand get in the way of the story. The CEO of Shift 2 said something a few years back. Many producers contemplate this model, but very few execute it. Well, I think that's still true. The idea of a brand funding an original series sounds really exciting in a room, but it's where the execution is. It's where most of these ideas quietly go to die. The writing, the casting, the pacing, and most importantly, the restraint required not to make it feel like a commercial every 5 minutes. That's genuinely hard to pull off for a brand who's been doing it their entire life. When it doesn't work, you get something awkward that nobody watches and everyone pretends didn't happen. But when it does work, you get something people love. And they love the brand for making it possible. Carmilla proved that the model works. A vampire show built by a feminine care brand. Yeah, it's shot in 4 days in Toronto, and it's a YouTube show, but 71 million views later, the question for me isn't whether this works. The question is why more brands aren't doing it. Okay, so if you want to go a little bit deeper on branded entertainment, what it actually is, how it's being used, and how brands are thinking about owning their audience instead of borrowing somebody else's, I'll link some resources in the description. If this kind of breakdown is useful, please subscribe. I'm going to keep looking at the campaigns that are actually doing something different and the thinking behind them. I'll see you in the next one.